What kind of mother drives past her own daughter's house every Friday morning just to tape a fine to the front door? For 11 months, mine did exactly that. 44 envelopes, 44 $50 fines, all for a mailbox color she had personally approved 7 years earlier. If you believe silence should never be mistaken for weakness, hit like right now. Subscribe if family power struggles keep you hooked. And tell me in the comments if you have ever had to prove your own truth to someone who raised you. My name is Melissa Hart. I am 35 years old and I am a structural engineer. I spend my days reading blueprints, checking load calculations, and making sure buildings do not fall down. I mention this because it matters later. I am someone who trusts documents more than feelings, and that habit ended up saving me. This story starts with a house on Chestnut Ridge Lane, a quiet street in a neighborhood called Cedar Hollow. The house belonged to my grandmother, Eleanor Hart, for almost 40 years. She raised 3 kids in that kitchen, buried a husband from that living room, and planted a bronze mailbox post at the end of her driveway the same week she moved in. My mother, Patricia, grew up in that house too, though you would never guess it from the way she started treating it once it became mine. Grandma Eleanor had a stroke 2 years before she passed. I moved in with her for the final stretch, cooking her meals, driving her to appointments, learning how she liked her tea. Those months were hard, but they were also the closest I ever felt to another human being. When she died, she left the house to me. Not to my mother, not split between us, just to me, written plainly in her will. I think that single decision is the real reason for everything that happened next, even though nobody said it out loud for almost a year. My mother has run the Cedar Hollow Homeowners Association for 6 years. Before that, she spent 30 years as an office administrator at the local middle school, the kind of job where you learn to enforce rules for people twice your size and never raise your voice while doing it. She brought that same energy into the neighborhood. She has a laptop bag she carries like a briefcase, a binder full of tabbed regulations, and a memory for every fence height and trash can placement in a 6-block radius. To be fair, some of what she does actually helps people. When a tree fell across old Mr. Delgado's driveway during a storm, she had it cleared in a day. When the street lights kept going dark on Birchwood Court, she fought the city for 3 months until they fixed it. People respect her, even when they are a little afraid of her. That combination is exactly why nobody questioned her when the fines against me began. 3 weeks after the estate was finalized and the deed was recorded in my name, the first notice showed up. Taped to the front door, corners pressed down twice so wind could never take it. Inside was a single page. Violation notice, mailbox color out of compliance, approved colors are black or dark green, fine assessed $50, payable to the Cedar Hollow Homeowners Association. I actually laughed when I read it. That bronze mailbox had been standing at the end of the driveway since before I was born. I called my mother immediately, expecting her to say it was a clerical mistake. Instead, she told me, in the calm voice she used to use on students in her old office, that community standards apply equally to every homeowner, regardless of history. I reminded her that Grandma had gotten that mailbox approved years ago. She told me ownership had changed, so the approval no longer applied. I remember standing in the kitchen holding the phone, genuinely confused about whether I was talking to my mother or to a stranger reading from a script. That night I went looking through the old paperwork Grandma kept in a filing cabinet in the hallway closet. She was organized in a way most people are not. I found the original architectural approval form from 9 years earlier, bronze mailbox post, style number listed, approved and signed by the board secretary. The secretary's signature on that old form was my mother's own handwriting. I did not scream and I did not pay the fine. Instead, I did what felt natural to me. I built a file. I requested a formal hearing with the architectural committee, the way the neighborhood bylaws allowed. I brought photos, dates, and the original approval form. The hearing lasted 11 minutes. My mother sat at the center of a folding table with 3 other board members, called me Ms. Hart the entire time, and explained that prior approvals do not transfer between owners, even family owners. The vote was 4-0 against me. One member, a soft-spoken man named Harold, would not look at me while he raised his hand. I sat in my car afterward for a long time. I thought about something Grandma used to say whenever the topic of the neighborhood as association came up. She would smile and tell me that a title on a piece of paper means nothing next to a name on a deed. At the time, I thought it was just one of her sayings. I did not yet understand she was warning me about something specific. The fines kept coming, every single Friday, like clockwork. My mother would drive past in her gray sedan around 7:30 in the morning, slow down just enough to walk to the door, tape the envelope, and drive off without ever ringing the bell. I started keeping every single one in a shoebox on my kitchen counter, dated and stacked in order, because that is simply how my brain works. 44 Fridays became 44 envelopes. Word travels fast on a small street, and it was not long before neighbors noticed the pattern. Nobody said much to my face except one woman, Ruth Alvarez, who had been my grandmother's closest friend for over 20 years. Ruth showed up one Friday morning holding a plate of banana bread, watched my mother's car pull away, and told me plainly that a liener would have had something to say about this. Then she looked past my house toward the back of the property and said something I did not fully understand until much later. She said I owned more of that neighborhood than people gave me credit for. If you have ever felt like someone in your own family was rewriting the rules just for you, drop a quick comment with the word paper trail, because that phrase is about to matter a lot more than you think, and stick around, because what happens at minute 20 completely flips this story. By early summer, the numbers had grown ugly. 40-something fines at $50 each, plus late fees the bylaws technically allowed, pushed the total past $2,000. Then came a certified letter, signed for at my own front door, that changed the entire tone of this fight. It was a notice of intent to file a lien against the property if the balance was not paid within 30 days. A lien is not just an angry letter. It attaches to your property in the county records. It follows the house through any sale or refinance. As someone who reads legal documents for a living, I understood exactly how serious that piece of paper was. My mother was not simply annoying me anymore. She was threatening to put a permanent mark on my grandmother's house in the county's own records. I read that letter maybe 10 times standing in the hallway, and near the bottom, in small print, was the name of the office where such documents get filed, the county recorder's office. If you are the kind of person who leaves a threat sitting in the one place records cannot be erased, you should think very carefully about what else lives in that same building. Before doing anything else, I tried one more time to fix this quietly, as a daughter, not as an engineer collecting evidence. I invited my mother to dinner. I cooked the pot roast recipe from Grandma's old recipe box, which in hindsight was either a peace offering or a dare. We made small talk for 20 minutes before I finally put my fork down and offered to pay the entire balance that night, in full, if she would simply stop the fines and drop the lien threat. She looked almost disappointed by the offer, which told me everything I needed to know. It was never about the money, she said. When I asked what it was actually about, she folded her napkin into a perfect square and told me that rules were how she showed love, that a neighborhood only works if someone is willing to hold the line, even against her own family. I asked her gently why this had all started exactly 3 weeks after the estate closed, not one day earlier. She looked at me for a long moment, then said only that Grandma made her choices, and she had made hers. She thanked me for dinner like I was a stranger she barely knew, and left. Standing on the porch afterward, something clicked into place. The fines were never really about a mailbox. They started the exact week ownership of that house changed hands. That timing was not an accident. That timing was the entire point. The county recorder's office sits in the basement of the courthouse downtown. Rows of filing cabinets, and the dry, papery smell that some people find boring, and I have always found strangely comforting. I went on my lunch break, mostly to confirm whether the threatened lien had actually been filed yet. Behind the counter was a woman about my age named Priya Shah, reading glasses pushed up into her hair, the kind of calm competence you only get from someone who has seen every property dispute a small county can produce. She pulled up my parcel number and paused. "Hart," she said, off Chestnut Ridge. I remember recording that estate transfer last year, clean survivorship chain, no complications. Then she checked the lien index twice and told me nothing had been filed yet against my property. As I turned to leave, she added something almost offhand, the way you'd mention rain in the forecast. She said records do not care who shouts the loudest, and that people in my neighborhood might be surprised by what the county's index actually showed about certain properties out there. I stood in that parking lot for a long time afterward, thinking about a strip of land behind my house that I had honestly never paid much attention to. Behind my grandmother's backyard fence sits a stretch of land, a little under an acre, that everyone in the neighborhood simply calls the old orchard. Grandpa planted apple trees back there decades ago, most of which are still standing. 6 years earlier, around the same time my mother took over the HOA, the association built a small storage shed on that land to hold lawn equipment, holiday decorations, and folding tables for the annual block party. Nobody ever questioned it. It had simply always been there, as far as most people were concerned. During probate, I had actually asked my mother directly what the arrangement was for that piece of land. She waved the question away almost instantly, telling me it was community property, always had been, and that I should not go stirring up paperwork over something so small. I was working long hours at the time, grieving, and buried under estate deadlines, so I let it go. That question sat quietly in the back of my mind for almost a year. Standing in that parking lot after talking to Priya, the question came back louder than ever. That Saturday, I walked the orchard from end to end for the first time since the funeral, the way Grandma and I used to walk it together picking apples. The HOA's welcome packet, the glossy one new homeowners get mailed, showed that land shaded green and labeled common area. Something about that label bothered me. I had looked at the original subdivision, plat years earlier out of simple curiosity, and I could not remember any common area drawn behind Grandma's house at all. Monday morning, I ordered a full title search on that parcel, every deed, every plat, every easement, going all the way back to when the neighborhood was first built. I paid for it myself and told no one what I was doing, not even Ruth. This part of the story is not dramatic. It is just paperwork, waiting rooms, and phone calls, but it is the part that actually matters most. While I waited for records to come back, Ruth filled in pieces no document could ever hold. She sat at my kitchen table one evening and told me about 1985, when the neighborhood was brand new and my grandparents were among the very first buyers. They bought the main house lot to live on, and then, almost as an afterthought, my grandfather bought the empty lot directly behind it too, mostly because he did not trust a young developer to leave it alone. Grandma turned that spare lot into her orchard before the first winter had even passed. The developer originally planned to build a clubhouse near the neighborhood entrance, but the company went under before it was ever finished, leaving Cedar Hollow with no shared gathering space. So Grandma, being Grandma, simply opened her gate. Block parties happened under those apple trees for years. Eventually, people forgot the orchard had ever technically belonged to one family at all. Ruth told me something else that made the hair stand up on my arms. She said that when the board first asked to place equipment storage back there years ago, Grandma was not careless about it. She wrote them a formal letter, had it notarized, and kept a copy in an old green filing box in her closet. Ruth suggested I go find it. That green box had been sitting 8 feet away from us, in the hallway closet the entire time. If a story like this has ever made you think about a document sitting somewhere in your own family that nobody has looked at in years, hit subscribe right now, because staying until the end of this video might just be the nudge you needed to go find it yourself. And if you want to know exactly what was inside that green box, keep watching, because it changes everything. The certified county records and Grandma's green box arrived on the same evening, and I will remember that kitchen table for the rest of my life. Inside the mailing tube from the county was a certified copy of the original subdivision plat, filed decades earlier. On that plat, drawn clearly in the surveyor's own lines, was the orchard parcel, not shaded, not labeled common area, not dedicated to anyone. A private, individually numbered lot, exactly like every other lot on the street. The title chain told a simple, clean story. My grandparents bought that lot the same year they bought the main house. When my grandfather passed, ownership moved fully to Grandma. When Grandma passed, it moved to me through the very same estate paperwork that transferred the house itself. No lease to the association was ever recorded. No easement, no dedication, nothing, in over 3 decades. Stapled behind the deeds were the property tax records, and this was the detail that actually made me put my hand over my mouth. Every single year since that lot was purchased, someone in my family had quietly paid property taxes on it. First my grandparents, then Grandma alone, then the estate, then me, on auto pay, filed away in my head under ordinary household expenses. My family had been paying to maintain land that hosted the neighborhood's storage shed, its holiday decorations, and its yearly block party, and my mother had known this the entire time. I brought everything to a real estate attorney named Warren Castillo, someone my engineering firm had worked with before. He read through every page twice, took off his glasses, and told me it was one of the cleanest ownership questions he had reviewed in years. In our state, he explained, someone using land they do not legally own generally needs many years of continuous, hostile possession before they can claim any right to it, and permission granted by the true owner resets that clock completely. The association had never even had a written agreement, only Grandma's quiet, revocable permission. Legally speaking, they were guests, nothing more. Warren laid out my options plainly. I could revoke permission immediately and have the shed removed within a set number of days. I could seek payment for years of prior use, or I could simply place the truth on record and let the association respond to it honestly. He told me I held every card in this situation, and that the only real question left was what kind of neighbor I wanted to be once the truth came out. I did not call him back for almost a week, because the honest answer was that some small part of me still wanted to be treated like a daughter, not like an opponent in a property dispute. Then the annual meeting notice arrived in my mailbox, agenda attached. Item 4, delinquent accounts to be read aloud. Item 5, community lot improvement project, an $18,000 assessment to expand the storage shed and pave a small parking area, discussion and vote. They were planning to pour concrete over my grandfather's apple trees and bill the entire neighborhood for the privilege. Reading that agenda in my driveway, something in me went very calm and very clear. Up to that point, my silence had only cost me $50 a week, one uncomfortable Friday morning at a time, my own choice to absorb. This was different. An $18,000 assessment split across dozens of households, charging ordinary families for land that was never the association's to build on in the first place. Retired neighbors on fixed incomes. Young families still paying off their mortgages. All of them about to be billed for a mistake, or a secret, that was never theirs to carry. Before any meeting and before any neighbor learned the truth from anyone but me, I gave my mother one final private chance. I drove to her house on a Sunday afternoon. She made coffee neither of us drank. I told her plainly, cancel the fines, drop the lien threat, and before Thursday, actually ask me about the orchard. Her chin lifted the way it always did right before she dug in. That land belongs to this association, she said, the same way it always has. I asked her to simply call the county and check. One phone call, 5 minutes. She told me she did not need a county computer to tell her what she had known for 30 years. Behind her on the wall was an old photograph from a summer block party decades earlier. The whole street gathered under Grandma's apple trees, Grandma at the center holding a pitcher of lemonade. My mother was in that photo too, if you looked carefully, standing at the very edge of the frame holding a serving tray, half turned away, the way she seemed to be in almost every old picture I had ever seen of her. Her voice softened for just 1 second. You were away for years, she said. You come back, and suddenly everything just lands in your lap, the house, the land, her. Then, almost as quickly, the calm authority returned. Rules are how I show love, she said. Someday you will understand that. By midweek, the atmosphere on our street had shifted. A story was quietly spreading that Grandma's granddaughter had inherited everything and was now scheming to cause trouble for the whole neighborhood out of pure greed. My mother had not simply avoided correcting that story. Isolation, I realized, was just another tool, exactly like a lien. That same night, at the very bottom of Grandma's green box, in a folder labeled simply Orchard, I found the letter Ruth had described. Dated years earlier, addressed to the board, written in Grandma's careful handwriting. She was pleased to allow the association temporary use of the land for storage and gatherings. The permission was hers alone to give, and hers alone to take back at any time. Nothing about the arrangement, she wrote clearly, should ever be mistaken for a transfer of ownership. Stapled behind it was the board's own written acknowledgement of receiving that letter, signed by the secretary at the time, in handwriting I would recognize anywhere, because it used to sign my school permission slips. My mother had known the truth for years. She had signed for it herself. The Thursday meeting opened at 7 in the evening under the very shed my grandfather's orchard had been quietly hosting for 6 years. Folding chairs, humming ceiling fans, dozens of households fanning themselves with yellow agenda sheets. My mother stood at the podium in a navy blazer, gavel in hand, running the room with total confidence. Minutes approved, budget reviewed, and then, right on schedule, item 4. She read my file aloud, date after date, violation after violation, her voice calm and pleasant the entire time, while neighbors turned to glance at me with the kind of sympathy people give a stranger in a fender bender. I sat still and let every single date land, because I had spent a year learning that steadiness was the one thing in this fight nobody could take from me. Then came item 5, the paving proposal, complete with a glossy rendering. Chairs creaked with quiet complaints about money, right up until a hand rose calmly in the third row. It belonged to Priya Shah, the recorder's office clerk, sitting there that night simply as a homeowner. "Before we vote," she said, in the same mild, dangerous tone I remembered from the courthouse basement, "does everyone here actually know who owns this land we are sitting on?" My mother answered instantly that the association had always owned it. Priya said gently that she worked in the county recorder's office, that she personally processes these deeds, and that the county held no record whatsoever of the association ever owning a single square foot of ground beneath that shed. The silence that followed was unlike anything I had ever heard from a room full of people. My mother struck the gavel once, and for the first time in 6 years, it did nothing at all. I stood, walked to the front, and asked the treasurer, not my mother, for space on his table. I unrolled the certified plat in front of 60 neighbors, and in the same steady voice I use on every job site, walked them through it. The original filing, the deed to my grandparents, the unbroken chain of ownership ending with my own name, the decades of tax payments, bundled and dated. Finally, Grandma's own letter, read aloud exactly as she had written it. "Use remains by my permission alone, and my family's ownership is not up for a vote." I did not look at my mother while the room turned toward her. I looked at the apple trees instead. Voices rose around the shed, some angry, some laughing in disbelief, a few calling for the board to resign on the spot. I could have let that anger carry the whole night for me. Instead, I raised my hand for quiet, and to my genuine surprise, the room gave it to me. I told them plainly that nobody was being evicted that night. I laid a single invoice on the table, calculated fair rental value for 6 years of shed and storage use, a number large enough to make the room go quiet again. Then I told them what I actually wanted instead, not that money, but 4 simple things. Every fine against my house refunded in full. The paving project canceled immediately. Future violation appeals reviewed by an independent committee, never by the same people who issued the fine. And the orchard corner formally set aside as a real community garden, planted and named for the woman who had quietly hosted this neighborhood for 30 years without ever once asking for credit. "Meet those 4 conditions," I said, "and the invoice goes back in its envelope, and the shed stays exactly where it is, as my tenant, not my landlord." My mother looked at me the way you look at a stranger wearing a familiar face. "For 11 months," she said quietly, "you taught me what a rule is worth when it comes from the wrong hands." Then I finally understood something myself and told her so. Grandma taught me who actually holds the deed. The motion to accept my terms passed within a minute, hands rising fast enough that half the room could not quite meet my mother's eyes while they voted. She gathered her papers, squared the edges twice out of pure habit, set the gavel down on the corner of my grandfather's plat, and resigned on the spot, effective immediately. As she passed me, she paused just long enough to say 5 words that explained the entire 11 months in a way nothing else had. That land was supposed to be mine. The refunds arrived within 2 weeks. The paving project quietly disappeared from every future agenda. The new appeals committee overturned 2 other unfair fines within its very first month, including one against an elderly widower's vegetable garden. That fall, neighbors showed up with shovels and built a small cedar fence around the orchard corner and hung a simple wooden sign that now reads Aliner's garden. My mother did not apologize, and she did not attend the planting day. She still lives on same street, still waters her flowers every evening, and some neighbors still wave, because plenty of them genuinely owe her for a cleared driveway or a fixed street light somewhere along the way. Around the holidays, she sent me a short message, only 1 line, telling me Grandma would have been proud of how I handled everything. I read it more times than I want to admit. I did not answer that night. Instead, I walked out to the orchard in the dark and watered the apple trees myself. This past Friday, 7:30 came and went with no car slowing down outside my house. I took my coffee out to the porch the way Grandma and I used to, and watched the morning light hit that quiet stretch of land behind the fence, finally being used exactly the way she always meant it to be. If this story reminded you of a document, a will, or a boundary sitting somewhere in your own family that nobody has looked at in years, take that as your sign to finally go find it. Share this with someone who has ever paid quietly for peace they did not owe. Drop a comment and tell me what you would have done differently at that podium. And subscribe so you never miss the next story about quiet people who finally speak up. I will see you in the next one.